Now it's the turn of the leader of the Liberal Democrats and Deputy Prime Minister, Nick Clegg.
Hello.
Thank you, Mr. Clegg. Yes, please. Take the hot seat. OK, first question.
The hot stand. Yeah.
A&E doctors working in a major incident hospital?
I think the biggest thing we can do, which we're not going to do overnight, is work out how we can keep people healthier in their own homes and their own communities so that we don't have an increasing number of people going to A&E for problems that could have been anticipated earlier. It sounds incredibly simple, but it's actually very complex. It's complex because, well, a bunch of reasons. One of them, as your parents, did you say both of them work in A&E?
Yeah, they do.
Do they work in the same A&E?
Yeah,
and
Colchester, which
and they've seen a massive increase in...
Yeah, and like bed shortages. And
Well, they would probably tell you, would be my guess, but correct me if I'm wrong, that one of the things that's happened in A&E is that we have an increasingly large number of elderly people with conditions which they might fall at home, they might have a long-term condition which means they're in and out of hospital. They then go into hospital via A&E. They then go into a hospital bed, and then it's very difficult sometimes, even though maybe your mum and dad, as clinicians, have judged that they're ready to leave hospital, to find a place to look after them in the community, and that's the social care system. So in the jargon, what everyone's been talking about for ages, but which we now need to get on and do, is integrate social care and healthcare. I think that's one of probably the biggest changes we can make. I think there's some other things we can do. My personal view is that if we can put the treatment of mental health conditions on the same footing as long been provided to physical health problems, I think that would have a transformative effect on the NHS, because a lot of people, again, your mum and dad might confirm this, will go to a doctor or even go to A&E with physical problems, which quite often have mental health origins. But because mental health has been underfunded, underappreciated actually, slightly brushed under the carpet for a long period of time, it's been an issue around which there's been far too much of a sort of embarrassment, a sort of foot shuffling taboo. Yeah. I think if we can put mental health and physical health on the same footing, that would make a huge difference as well. So look, I put probably at the top of my list would be making sure that social care and healthcare work together better so that people don't end up staying in hospital beds for longer than is necessary, and making sure that mental health is given exactly the same, for instance, waiting time standards and access standards, which we've long had for physical health issues, are only now going to start coming in over the next year or two for mental health problems. I think that those two things would make the biggest difference, in my view.
Has that answered your question,
Thank
Insaf?
you.
Yeah?
Yep.
Anything else on the NHS? Who wants to come in with lots of questions on the NHS? Let's go here with Basil.
Hi there, I'm Basil, and I just wanted to know, don't you think one of the biggest reasons for the increasing waiting times is the 2012 Health and Care Social Act, which your government passed in 2012, which has privatised some of our NHS? What would you comment on that?
I don't agree with that at all. If you actually look at the facts rather than some of the myths and allegations around what's happening, for instance, with the private sector, the independent sector, when this coalition government came into power in May 2010, the previous government had increased the amount of all of the NHS money, your money that's used in the independent or private sector, to, I think it was around 4% of the total. It's now 6%. So the idea that, a 2% addition to something which was already much larger, inherited from Labour, is some great mass privatisation, complete, utter nonsense. There's no evidence to suggest that is the case at all. Actually, what was at the heart of that much maligned and much commented on piece of legislation actually goes back, what's your name? Insa's question, which is how do we take an NHS which was designed basically for a different country, a different time, when it was all about hospitals, when it wasn't about mental health, it wasn't about keeping people healthy in the community, to a kind of 21st century Britain, where people are living much longer. And the whole point of that bill was nothing to do with privatisation. It was all to do about trying to put the authority about decisions about where money goes to in the NHS in the hands of people who know best, namely clinicians. Why? Because it was our view, and it remains my view, that if you want to make sure that we keep people as healthy as possible without them having to resort to going to A&E and without them languishing in hospital beds, the most important thing to do is to empower GPs, empower clinicians to put money where it can help people keep them healthy. We can't have an NHS which is purely designed on dealing with people's health when it's already gone wrong. Surely we want a health system which keeps people healthy, doesn't just provide the emergency remedies when things go wrong. And that, in a nutshell, is what that legislation was trying, difficult though it is, trying to deliver.
Thank you, Deputy Prime Minister. We've got a slightly related question from Facebook, which is going to come up there. Why do important life-saving services always suffer, but there's money for Trident?
So I'll come to Trident in a minute, because I personally think the like-for-like replacement for Trident advocated by Labour and the Conservatives is a nonsense. Of course it is. It's just obvious. This was a nuclear weapons system that was designed to flatten Moscow at the touch of a button in the Cold War. Well, we clearly don't live in that same world, and of course we should be coming down the nuclear ladder. As it happens, I wish there was a great pot of gold in doing that. I've been told by the experts that decommissioning a nuclear weapons system costs a huge amount of money anyway. So I don't think it's as... in other words, whilst I might agree with, I think, what lies behind the question, that we shouldn't just stick with Trident as it is, I'm afraid changing tack on Trident doesn't necessarily suddenly produce, miraculously, a whole bunch of money for the NHS. Look, on the money point on the NHS, and it comes slightly to your two questions, of course we need to safeguard the budget of the NHS. We've actually done that in this coalition government. Unlike many other public services, the police have had to make 20% savings. We've actually increased by over £12 billion the amount of money going into the NHS. The new independent head, so, breathe easily, not a politician, you can believe what he says, a guy called Simon Stevens has calculated that by the end of the next Parliament, the funding gap in the NHS will be £8 billion. My party, we've explained how you find that money by tightening up some of the tax exemptions which are provided only to the very wealthy, and also re-linking the amount of money going into the NHS with the growth of the economy once the deficit is dealt with. So you do need to protect the budget for the NHS. You need to secure the money that's been identified by Simon Stevens. My point, however, would be, to the Facebook questioner, is that in and of itself is not enough. You need to do the reforms for an ageing population. You need to do the reforms on mental health, and those reforms as well. Because if you don't do that, you're just going to put money into a system that isn't yet properly working for all of us.
Okay, next question from Sam.
Hi, I'm at school currently in sixth form, and almost everybody that I know agrees that we don't have enough teaching on life skills, such as drug education, sex education, even politics.
Yeah.
There's such pressure on teachers and schools to deliver exam syllabuses that they've just not got time. How would you tackle that if you came to power?
Well, I'll tell you one thing where I'd start, where bluntly I just haven't been able to make progress with the Conservative Party and coalition, is if you take citizenship classes, right? Did any of you, hands up those of you who thought your citizenship classes when you were at school or art school were any good? Those of you who thought the citizenship classes weren't any good?
Oh dear.
And those of you who just didn't have it at all? Yeah, well, that shows the mixed bag. I think good citizenship classes are, as those who put their hands up, who said you did have good classes, are a really good thing. They empower people, they teach youngsters about the world they live in, they teach about politics, democracy, and so on. The requirement at the moment to teach some kind of citizenship class is there for normal maintained schools, but not for academies and free schools. So why is that? Why should there be a requirement for it to be taught to thousands and thousands of schools across the country, but not to certain other schools which just so happen to have a different nameplate at the school gates? The same with personal sex relationship education. Incredibly important to empower youngsters to feel that they're, that they kind of can take responsible decisions.
Would you enforce that then?
Yes, I would. So that's what I was alluding to. I have long thought. Something you might be not familiar with, but you might have come across the whole phenomenon of online bullying and kind of sometimes sort of sexual intimidation you can see online. That's a new threat for a lot of young people that didn't exist, not when I grew up. It's quite recent. That's the kind of thing, actually, where having universal courses on sex and health education, relationship education in schools, I think could really help a lot of vulnerable youngsters. For some reason, that ask David Cameron when he comes here, the Conservatives just got some ideological view that shouldn't be taught, or you shouldn't insist that it should be taught in free schools and academies. That's a nonsense. If it's taught in one school, surely it should be taught in all schools. And that's what I think should happen, because I think it helps youngsters prepare for a lot of the perils and pitfalls that now exist.
Thanks, that's Sam. We're going to move on and just let Luke come back on that point, yeah?
So you were saying about life skills and being taught within schools. What about services outside of schools like NCS, the National Citizen Service, where they build on life skills and give young people kind of a feeling of purpose and independence? Do you think that's a priority at all?
I think they're great. And not only those projects, there are thousands upon thousands of outstanding community projects that take youngsters who, from the most, I don't know, the toughest backgrounds, or who've kind of fallen foul of their teachers, or, you know, are kind of being disruptive or whatever. I mean, this morning, actually, in South West London, I visited a rugby sports scheme that caters for kids from, you know, who've basically had some real problems at school. And it's wonderful to see, because basically through sports, they're giving those youngsters who otherwise might fall by the wayside a real sense of confidence. I visited a number of boxing clubs that get some of the most kind of disruptive kids and turn them into quite self-disciplined youngsters. So I don't think you should be prescriptive about it. I think the worst thing to do is to have politicians or central government sort of say, this is, you know, thou shalt do this or that project. But we do need to give support to all of those community projects that help make sure that youngsters who otherwise might fall by the wayside instead stay at school, do well, and have a better future.
Thank you, Deputy Prime Minister. Luke, changing the subject.
Yeah, completely. Hi, my name's Luke. I was actually 18, 19 when the last election was around, and you were the first people I voted for. The big issue I have is that I now feel responsible for my sister now having to pay 3 times the amount of tuition fees. First question really boils down to, why should we feel like we can trust you? Obviously, we understand it was part of a coalition and that combinations had to be made, but we've seen now that actually, as we all knew originally, it's not going to work out, the heightened tuition fees. It's not going to get repaid. What's your stance? Are you sorry for the fact that you weren't able to reduce it to zero the tuition fees?
Sure. Well, on the last part of your question, I've apologised musically, no less. Look, can I just first, actually, a very important point, your sister.
Yes.
You say your sister's at school. It's really important to remember. Just forget, you know, politics and you know, all that, and I'll come to that in a minute. Of course I will. I've always taken this on the chin, and I'll do it again.
No,
but just for your sister, and for people wanting to go to university, please don't, which you said, somehow suggest that she is paying 3 times. She's not, which is the reason, of course, why, despite all the predictions at the time, more youngsters are now going to university than ever before. More youngsters from disadvantaged backgrounds are going to university than ever before. More youngsters from black, minority, ethnic backgrounds are going to university than ever before. Why? Because unlike the fee system that you had under the previous Labour government, your sister doesn't have to pay anything up front, and she doesn't have to pay anything back, only until she can afford to do so. And why I say that's so important is, if she can't pay it off, she doesn't have to. If she's on low pay, she doesn't have to pay a penny. If she's not working, she doesn't have to pay a penny. And the reason I say that is because I don't want to shirk the political controversy, and I'll come back to that. But for your sister and for the thousands of youngsters who are going to university, it's really important that she knows and they know that there is absolutely no impediment going to university whatsoever. And in many respects, let me give you an example. If your sister, what course is she doing at university?
She's currently doing childhood studies.
She's doing?
Childhood studies.
Childhood studies. Let's say she goes to, so what, to do early years work? And,
yes.
Yeah, let's say she goes into early years work and she ends up getting paid, I don't know, roughly the average income these days is what, £24,000–25,000 in this country. Under the old fee system, she would have had to pay 67 quid a month, right, under the Labour fee system for that. She will now have to pay a third of that, £22 a month. She might have to pay longer, but she will have to pay much less every week and every month. I only give you those facts because of the fury and the anger and so on. Sometimes I think the facts have been a little bit lost. Now, onto your question. What I of course hope politically, I've never shirked the fact that I'm not Prime Minister. We have 9% of MPs, Liberal Democrat MPs in government, in Parliament. I didn't win the election, therefore, of course, we can't implement, alas, the full Liberal Democrat manifesto in full. I will, of course, be saying to you and to everybody else, I hope that as well as judging me and my party on the one thing we haven't been able to do, you also give us credit for the hundreds of things that we have done. Lower taxes, more apprenticeships, fairer pensions, better education for youngsters by giving them free healthy meals at lunchtime, the pupil premium, transformative experience in schools for kids from the most disadvantaged backgrounds. But of course, I'm not going to shirk the fact, I've never hidden from the fact that if you are a party in a coalition government, coalition means you can't get your way on everything, and we clearly, given that both Labour and the Conservatives wanted to see fees go up, there was no way that we could implement our own policy.
One sentence, what's your response to that?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, actually, that even though you said that she's going to be paying less, she is still paying 3 times the amount. She still has 3 times the amount of debt, and that will still be looming over her. You're encouraging with this mindset the idea that it's actually okay to work for less and below the targets in order to actually, like, not have to pay it, you know. Now lots of us here are going to feel like, why should we earn over 20 grand? We're going to have to pay more debt. We're going to have to pay more stuff.
Sure. No, look, I'll be completely open, of course. Got to be open about
So
the fact.
why is it okay that I should have to feel like it's better for me financially not to earn more? It's better for me financially to take a lower paying job, do less hours, focus more on myself than to actually go and be a contributing member.
So,
I'm a computer science graduate. I could go and do that as a degree option, but you know what? I'm going to have to pay more money doing that. Why shouldn't I just go down, take another job?
The simple reason, which is the reason, of course, why fees were introduced in 2003, was that the evidence is overwhelming, and it still remains the fact that if you have a university degree, your earning power, what you can earn during your working life, is considerably higher. So, in effect, the decision that was taken well before my party came into government by the previous Labour administration was that the costs of a higher education are shared by the taxpayers generally, many of whom, of course, have never been lucky enough to go to university, but partly by the increased earnings that graduates earn because they've been to university. So that's the system we inherited. Of course, as you know, my party couldn't implement. And by the way, look, as you quite rightly alluded to, of course I've apologised for the fact that that particular policy of my party's we couldn't implement. I sometimes wish, I only point this out, I sometimes wish I could hear an apology from David Cameron for not implementing his policy that he promised he would on immigration, or Ed Miliband for crashing the economy in the first place. But there you go. That's the way these things are. What I do think I'm entitled to say is if you look at the details of the system we put in place, it was the next best thing. It is in effect like a graduate tax. You only pay when you can, and you only pay what you can afford to.
I'll finish off by saying thank you.
Luke, we have to move on. Just some quick responses to that issue. Obviously, it's a burning issue. Carissa, just give us a couple of sentences.
I mean, with that being said, as you said, that over the 3 years, we're basically paying. We basically have to pay 3 times more than we would.
Not when you're at university, no.
But the thing is, why should I be paying that much amount of money when I'm not even secured a graduate job after?
Well, that's...
Okay, we'll just take a couple more, Deputy Prime Minister.
But can I just say, it's very important.
Sure.
If you don't get a graduate job, in other words, if you don't get a job which pays well, then you don't pay anything at all.
Then why should I be stuck at that? I don't want to earn that. I would love to earn more.
Yeah, but here's the thing, okay? Forget the coalition, forget me, forget the Liberal Democrats. If you had carried on with the system before, right? The fee system, which was introduced by Labour in 2003, it's really important you understand this. When you left university, you would have to start paying back the moment you started earning £15,000, which is not a very high income, right? Under the new system, you don't have to pay when you're earning 15 or 16 or 17 or 18 or 19 or 20 or you only start paying when you start paying back when you start earning £21,000 or more. So in the same way that you, of course, should be blunt with me, I have to be blunt with you that you've got to compare this system with the system that came before it. And actually, and that, I think, is one of the reasons why so many more youngsters are, despite all the furore, going to university. The new system makes it more, not less, affordable. Of course, it might cause me political embarrassment. I can't do my party's policy. All I'm trying to say to you, and I'm assuming, sorry, I'm making assumptions about how old you are, that you're hoping to go to university. I really, really want you to know that you pay nothing up front and you don't pay back nearly as punitively as you did under the system we inherited.
Let's get some other topics in. We'll come back. We'll try and come back to this. Charlene.
Hi Nick, I'm Charlene. Now that's just a great example of how you went into politics, or you went into that promise with great intentions, but obviously party lines, party politics stopped you from doing so. Now, do you ever feel the overwhelming pressure because of party politics and trying to, you know, stay with what your party wants, but you've got your coalition as well? Do you ever feel like you're compromising yourself?
Sure. So Charlene, it's a really important point in this. I would love to be Prime Minister. Of course I would. I'd love to not have these questions from, it was Luke, wasn't it? Of course I would. Who wouldn't? I'm a human being. Of course I'd like to say, yeah, I can do exactly what I want. I can do my whole manifesto in full. It's a democracy. I didn't win the election. There are 9 of all the MPs in the House of Commons and 9% of the Liberal Democrats. I've never hidden from anybody that if you have a government composed of different parties, by definition, neither party can do everything it wants. Now, some people might like that. I've had a lot of people shouting at me for 5 years saying, why don't you do exactly what you want? Because I don't have the mandate to do it. I don't have the right. I do not have the democratic right to do exactly what I want because I didn't win the election. And at the end of the day, it's not whether I'm a Liberal Democrat or a Labour or Tory or whatever, you have to be a Democrat. And in a party where you, not me, you the people, decide that no single party had the right to run the government on their own, compromise follows like night follows day. What you then need to do, and this is, I think, is an important point, is be open with people if you're going to have to compromise about what your priorities are. So, for instance, what you'll hear from me in the coming weeks is what are the kind of priorities for the Liberal Democrats in the run-up to the next general election, so that you, Charlene, know that if the Liberal Democrats are going to be in government again, what are the things that we're really going to fight for and not necessarily, you know, ever compromise on. As it happens, if you take out the 2010 Liberal Democrat manifesto, I'm not sure if you have an edition in your library, but I will, yeah, I'm sure, a well-thumbed copy. If you did, you would see that the 4 things we put on the front page of our manifesto, we have delivered. You don't pay any tax on the first £10,000 you earn. We're over-delivering on that. The £2.5 billion pupil premium that I referred to earlier, we're delivering that. Sorting out the economy, we're delivering that. Pushing for political reform. Those are the 4 things which we've actually stuck to religiously. Now, I understand, of course, because of a policy that wasn't on our front page, but nonetheless we couldn't deliver, and all the notoriety around it. The allegation is, oh, you have failed to deliver anything you promised. That's simply not true. Look at the front page of our manifesto, look at what we've done in government, and I'm actually really proud of what we've delivered.
Just a quick response to this from Tom over here.
Hey, yes, I'm just wondering then, I've got 2 very quick questions.
One question,
okay,
please.
One very quick question. If it came to it in 2015, would you join David Cameron in a coalition again?
It's exactly like last time. It's not my choice or his choice or Ed Miliband's choice. It really is your choice. So last time, it was obvious that even though no party had won the election and got a sort of slam dunk majority, the Conservatives got the most votes and the most seats. So I said, according to the sort of democratic principles I was just talking to Charlene about, that in a democracy, the party, and frankly, it's regardless whether you like them or loathe them, if that party's got more votes and more seats, it has the democratic right, after an election, to seek to form a government if it wants to, which is what the Conservatives did. We had negotiations with them. As it happened, there was no other combination that was possible. I spoke to Gordon Brown a couple of occasions because he wanted to see whether a Lib Dem Labour coalition could be formed. It was numerically impossible because Labour and Lib Dem MPs don't make up a majority in the current Parliament. So, you know, look, I'm like anyone in politics. I've got my dreams and my ideals. I'm also a pragmatic person. I have to respond to the instructions given by the British people. And the instructions last time were that the only way that we could have a stable government in this country at a time when we are crying out for stable government because the country was teetering on the edge of an economic precipice was that particular combination of Conservative and Liberal Democrats. But if you guys give us different instructions next time, I will try and do my democratic duty to follow your instructions.
Okay, Kwasi?
Yeah.
Where's Kwasi? There you go. Okay.
Hi, as somebody who lives independently and is soon to be
Sorry, I can't hear you, Kwasi.
Sorry. As somebody who lives independently and is soon to be graduate, what guarantees do you have to ensure rent is affordable for those on low or moderate incomes?
To guarantee what?
To ensure rent is affordable for those on low or moderate incomes.
Well, on rent, I mean, I think there are a number of things we need to do. Firstly, we need to make sure that longer rent contracts and agreements are much more widely used. I think this these short-term rent arrangements, which really, really can leave people in the lurch, are very, very unfair indeed. And I mean, if you want, I can take your details separately and give you some more information about the work we're doing to make sure that longer-term rentals become the norm rather than the exception. Here in London, as in large parts of the country, do you know what? I've read endless policy documents. At the end of the day, our biggest problem is here, we just don't build enough homes. We just don't build enough new properties, particularly affordable properties. And we, in my judgment, need to build as a country maybe, 250, 300,000 new properties every year to simply start matching the demand for people looking for properties, not least to rent. There's a whole different ways you can do that. I personally think we can do more to give local authorities a freer hand to build stuff. I think we can use the muscle of the state, of the central government, to put finance into housing more significantly as well. But I would single out for you making sure that the rental terms are fairer for people who are in rented accommodation, A, and B, that we build more homes on a much larger scale over a sustained period of time.
Okay, anything else on renting? Do you buy into that? Do you think he can solve your renting problem?
Well, I guess. Also, Diane Abbott, the MP for Hackney, said that she feels rent controls that they have in New York will be good. Yes. Renting caps. Just
quickly,
yeah, they're very seductive, the idea of rental controls, aren't they? It's just a pragmatic question of, do they really work? Do they really lead to the spread of affordable rents? And there, I think, to be honest, the debate is much more mixed. They can actually have quite a knock-on effect on squeezing a lot of people out of rented accommodation altogether, because they make it less attractive for landlords to come in and rent out. And so that's unless you think you can sort of do the whole rental thing without having landlords actually buy houses and make them available for rent. Unless you think that, I think you've got to be a little bit careful about the knock-on effects of rent controls on having more people invest money in the properties in the first place, which is what you need to make sure that you've got a roof over your head.
Let's get another subject in, Murad, on apprenticeships.
Last September, I was lucky enough to defer a university place to take up a job. However, many of my friends have gone to apprenticeships that pay as little as £2.73 an hour, less than the bus fare to and from work, with no guarantee of a job at the end. What would you do to change the situation and improve apprenticeships?
So the minimum wage for apprenticeships, you're right, is set differently, as you quite rightly alluded to the 650, the sort of adult minimum wage, for a reason. And the reason, of course, is that apprenticeships, by definition, are not supposed to be the same as a kind of full-time, fully qualified job. And so you have this difference. Actually, as it happens, Vince Cable, my colleague in government, has increased the apprenticeship minimum wage quite considerably, by the largest sort of percentage increase in recent years. And thankfully, if you look at the average, not your friends that you alluded to, the average minimum wage paid to apprentices is generally across the country much higher than that. It tends to be well short of the £6, but it's often, I think the average, I can find out for you, I think it's over four quid an hour. But so this is a really difficult balance. How do you make sure that you get people in on apprenticeships, because it's such an important conveyor belt to then getting people into work? How do you make sure that employers feel that they can, that it's worth it for them, that it's not too expensive, but make sure that it's not exploitative? And I think getting the balance by, which is the way we're trying to do it, increasing the statutory rate of the apprenticeship minimum wage, whilst at the same time encouraging employers, which on the whole, they do, to pay more than that, I think is the right approach. I think if you simply whack up the apprenticeship minimum wage to the, inverted commas, normal minimum wage, you'll discourage lots of people from taking apprenticeships. And one of the most exciting things in recent years is the huge expansion of apprenticeships we've seen under this government. And whilst, yes, we've saved some money controversially in places like higher education, we've poured money into apprenticeships. Just recently, we had for the first time ever, the 2 millionth new apprentice take up an apprenticeship in this country because of the massive expansion in apprenticeships. And they're just a great way of, as you know, of combining learning with working. And I think it's great that they're becoming so popular.
We're trying to squeeze one more question in from Facebook, which is going to come up now. I'd like to know, this is from Anthea Orchard, I'd like to know what Nick Clegg would do differently if he was Deputy Prime Minister again. I feel a Frank Sinatra song coming on.
Yeah, exactly. Where do I start? Oh, look, I mean, of course there are individual decisions, there are individual policies, there are individual moments, all the rest of it, where you kind of think, I could have done that better, or expressed that better, or explained that better. But in terms of the kind of where was the country back in May 2010 and where it is now, I'm incredibly proud, and I'm not going to hide from you, of course, my party suffered in the polls and all the rest of it, that we stepped up to the plate, because I feel if the Liberal Democrats had not done it, you know, we were kind of more or less where Greece was back in May 2010. Well, our deficit was almost exactly the same as Greece, and I just think now that we've got more, you know, youth unemployment now much lower than it was when we came into office, more apprenticeships for youngsters than ever before. We've taken over 3 million people on low pay out of paying any income tax altogether. Got youngsters from poor backgrounds receiving a healthy hot meal at lunchtime for the first time ever because of what we've done. Those are things I'm proud of. So I think it's probably pride more than regret.
Thank you, Deputy Prime Minister. Je ne regrette rien, perhaps. That's it for this session. Deputy Prime Minister Nick Clegg, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.